They Chesonga Chimbera. Namri Nyamguna Sondua. But then you miss some Mandenas. Koreans are married to then you miss some Mabena. What's it? To then you miss some Mabena. And
Tarba Dunya.
Tarba Dunya Chishim magicians. Kunjun Korea Juri Masamna. Oh, Zawa Chuzu Meshebe. Sealing in June Joseph Tembada. Quar Kangaching by Sheba Ship. She's in Laminiam later. Ya Najung Yamlisa Tandu Ketish Chancelos. Shesun Badara. Today you miss some Lambenas. Don't let them buggy. Dida go Dunga to the Awoji. Some the town in it, and Bessie Majena, some girl. Putting you miss some Mabena. Putting you miss some Mabena.
Oh, Tarba Dunya.
Tarba Dunya Chishimera. Don't let them buggy qua Tatanda. Koya Nash. Koya Luce, Marazu Luce, Longula Sobatezu Kangadi. Don't let them buggy the ora. Oh, Tezu and it, Marazu, the one of Chimbashigi. Any Jungun de Chimba Samne, Chashin Chimbukiora. Oh, Tindy Tezo with Gurns Samlatane, Tezo Gangalit Tungin Junguare, Tungiaware, Tungegi, Sudia, which is Samlu Madana, Sungiordo, to Dini Samla Madana, and Tarbas Tungele Tarbe, Tarba Duni de Kesugumare Sungudua. Oh, did you love that number?
So the Lama Dzongkhapa said in, well, concise meaning of the stages of the path to enlightenment. If we do not, or I'll put it, if you do not make effort to reflect on the disadvantages of true sufferings, you cannot precisely give rise to a strong intention for liberation. If you do not reflect on these stages of entering into samsara, the true origins, then you will not know how to cut the root of samsara. Therefore, cherish relying strongly upon disenchantment, the determination to be free of samsara, and knowledge of what it is that binds us to samsara. The Reverend Guru practiced in this way. Those who desire liberation should do likewise. So the first two lines there, if you do not make effort to reflect on the disadvantages or faults of the true sufferings, then you will not precisely give rise to the intention to attain liberation. So here, when we talk about true sufferings, we're referring to Nelu Longchu, the place that we're in, the body that we're in, and all the resources we have. All of these we regard as sources of pleasure, but in fact they are only sources of suffering. They are sufferings. We can refer to them in that way. And if you don't make effort to understand this, then you can't precisely produce the intention to become liberated. So we're here just contemplating the faults of being attached to the things of samsara, like the places and the body, and our bodies and our resources. So, for example, if we think about the lower realms, hungry ghosts, hell beings, and animals, and think about the suffering that is experienced within those realms, then we produce a strong wish to be free of those sufferings and then to attain a favorable rebirth as a human or a deity, and then that kind of a rebirth, even that kind of a rebirth is subject to the sufferings of cyclic existence, and so then we, based on seeing the sufferings in general of being reborn into cyclic existence, we develop a wish to, or a strong intention to be free or to be liberated of the sufferings of cyclic existence. So here we're if we think about then if we think about, as we have in the previous chapter, that our about our bodies as being impermanent and also having when you say a suffering, a nature of suffering, then we won't we produce a kind of mind that wants to be free of that kind of suffering.
Marik Pache, they want any, make a sa, Kivele, Matuvina, and yes, on Chiguara, Kivele Tuvina, had a military. Oh, dinner she, 통내 머리에 꾸내라 나냐 뱅간지게 꾸내라 아니 차당게 삼로게 대왕게 고슴지 레사네 개와사스나 하다 밀리게 요라 근데 군중 코에 중리 마삼나 코에 자와 주제 메시베서 군중데 간데신 중고도 대 중단 중로데 주디게 림바데 마삼나 아니 동해 되게 자와 매버서야 돼 하고고 말이 동해 자와 가는 연구도 때네 대 매버서야 돼 하고고 말이 근데 동해 주 군중데 간데신 연구도 때데 하고고 그래서 거야도 주린 삼고로 검고로 해서 거도
So in the next two lines he's saying that if we don't reflect about the stages of entering into cyclic existence, the true origins, then we won't understand the way to cut the root of cyclic existence. So here, you think about the sufferings, then you have to wonder, well, what brings them about? How do they? What is their cause? And so then, when you reflect on the sufferings of, say, the lower realms of the hell beings, hungry ghosts, and animals, then it's the ignorance that, ignorance about the cause and effect of karma, then that causes us to get involved in non-virtuous actions, and then as a result of those non-virtuous actions we were reborn in those realms, and it's a result of virtuous actions then that we're reborn into the higher realms, or the happy realms, or what fortunate realms as a human or a deity. And the way we get involved in that kind of a rebirth is just through our ignorance that misconceives that the self is somehow independent. Then based on that we get involved in usually attachment and hostility, and then based on attachment and hostility all the other afflictions, and then through those we perform virtuous actions. Then so then if we understand then how we get in and reflect on how we get involved into cyclic existence, then we can understand how it is that we can eliminate those causes at the root.
뭐야? 다들 내성기 코에 싸워를 주주시나. 당에 성리 깨발아야 싸워도 가르를 내 준비를 몸에 남샤리사 기디기 랜데 남샤디 심바체. 될 때는 기디를 랑도 수신 주발을 때는 아니 내성기 코에 싸워도 주주디 신에 싸워 주요로.
Then we can take the example of how would this happen for rebirth into the miserable realms. What is it that causes us to be reborn there? Is our ignorance of cause and effect, that we don't know how to distinguish what is virtuous and what is non-virtuous. So if we then are able to and so then we perform non-virtuous actions, and those as a result get us reborn into the lower realms. So in order to overcome that ignorance, then we have to develop the knowledge of what it is that is virtuous and what it is that is not virtuous, and cultivate the virtuous.
뭐야? 전에 기본 중대신데 코아 플라자 밀어서봐 코아 강로 깨베이나야. 디 코에 동에 녀에 싸와 가르스나 방지 나오냐 배가 라오한지 벨로티레. 될 때는 차다지 Tiwangi Lesane, and Lada Miller Soba, Kiva Lesan, Lada Miller Soba, Chigiore. Ti Junset Zawade, Tanziri, Kansa Dancity. Ti Tiliani, never swell, Tangi Kongore, something. And Tonga Dame Base, something round and Ade, Pumbuda, Chik the way you marry, Pumbuda Bay, or Tade the way you marry. Ti Pumbulia, round that you marry, something. Dame Tongbani Comne, and it quite our Jenny, quite a tally touchy we are.
So, if we then think about how we get involved into rebirth into the human or deity realms, then that is due to our thinking I, or me, and that this I or this me somehow exists from its own side, in its own right. And so then we then produce the afflictions of attachment and so forth out of that, and then engage in virtuous deeds, and as a result of that get reborn into the favorable realm. What do you say? Favorable rebirths. So then how do we then put a stop to that is we have to reflect on how that self that exists from its own side, from in its own right, is neither the same as the five aggregates, our body and mind, or different from the five aggregates, our body and mind. And then in that, when we do that reflection, then we see that we see the emptiness or the lack or the non-existence of that kind of self, and then focus on that. And that acts as a way of, eliminating the root of, or the cause of of that, of being reborn into those realms.
Telia kar samlutanguris ne medabada tungewa samlutangures medabada tungewani de samlutane koale tende gilo kesona ane koe zawakare tangzi maripare tangzi soji orbe seji orbe kunjung tembase o goju ore goden tobi ore goden tobege jukare jeure o lam gongure bane bada tongba gongure se ane tongtamini de songeora Nambu medabada tungewa song tene koa ke tini samlutane koalia kira kesona de jukare tangzi ba ko kunjunti oh de seji yorbe no tangzi seji yoren goba tobi ores goba tobi jukare no tangzi ponje ke chela dame to gore tonga da dame ba ni samlutane dame kongures de songeora
so then the Buddha stated this is the truth of suffering. So we have to then understand how things have this the things meaning the places, the bodies, the resources, all of these phenomena within cyclic existence are true sufferings. Then once we understand that, we then reflect on what is the cause of all of these, and we can see that cause is the very root cause is our what are we going to call it? Self-grasping or apprehension of a self that exists from its own side, And then, so then we can understand, well, is there a cessation to that? Is there a way of eliminating that completely, like the true cessation? Then we understand that there is that way of understanding through developing, of eliminating it through understanding the emptiness or selflessness or the lack of such a self. And then is there a way of doing that? Then is there a path or a way of doing it? The path is there, and so then the Buddha taught the true path with true paths, and that would be developing the wisdom that cognizes emptiness or selflessness.
No, yeah, no, the industry, oh, the industry, that ambo, quality, tanduji, low, jevalia, and quality to major and to shake. Oh, this shape a chakwe, quality tarwacha, quality tarwachevala, quality to major and to shake, and quality to major and to shevala, tambo turk, and quality to major and to rang some lutanque, the Nayane and the Combalatene. Tungele tende ki lochi gwar tende, ada kwa tungele tewa shebe chedo, ene koye so lu ki lu tunga wa yendang yenu ki, ene chu si kebe kabchi chu di shu sambe, kulung se tamne ne sen kukure.
So then we should reflect that through understanding the true sufferings, the suffering nature of samsara, its places, its bodies, its resources, all by understanding this, the suffering nature, then we can develop this wish to be free of it. Therefore, today I will listen to these teachings from Aryadeva's 400 verses and in order to understand this suffering, in order to understand this suffering and develop this intention to leave, and then based on that I will reflect on it over and over again, and then finally I will also meditate on it.
Oh yeah. The children who are nearly long jealous of some time Ngarazu, the junior to Shanshai Yorite, the junior Chibu Marese, and the Dika Sore, Tungeji, Shichiguare, Tungeji, Tungavar Chiguares. Some go in and that's all Chakbashin said, so the lady sonza, and a lady Lagwa to change Chakwashi Marese, Colula Tenet to make Angade, Luigi Naza Sierra Nawa Keba Sierra, and the Lula Koyagi Saya Koyada, or Tindechi to Sugdeti Regalo Sobakoya, Tiecho to go, and land of Saji Tungero Yangje, there we are the teen so de. Shinja Jesag Luigi Chane Bechane, and the Lutung ever on Shinjas to Chevdwa. Chidanko and Logicanga, Tungenju Shimba Samko.
In general, we tend to think of all the places, bodies, and resources of cyclic existence or samsara as being sources of happiness, but if we think about it, it's our attachment to these that is, and well, if we think about it, then they're in fact sources of suffering, and then if we and it's our attachment to these. And so if we then reflect about these as sources of suffering, then we'll understand that it's primarily our attachment to our bodies, okay, that is, I mean, of course, all the other things within cyclic existence are sources of suffering, but it's primarily our bodies, because it's through our bodies that we experience, everything. We experience we have our sensory experiences, and we have to always feed, provide for our bodies, and they're the basis for us undergoing various forms of suffering, like birth, sickness, and so forth, and so here in this chapter, the focus is on the body as being the source of suffering.
Oh yeah. Did you call Lulu? Can't tie it. She don't call Shiriba to get Lulu Katagiora. Something she said it to do so. Garazu do Ludi, Yawamara Shada, Ribangarazu, says Sutu Shayora. Oh, Tinder Lulu Tenene, Kanga Yungu to make it tie Su, that Suze, Batanya, Bati, Shimba, Jambalosa, Teleshenja, Yungi Samje, Luigi Samluta. Lulu Tempe Sem de Sembragware, Sem Chig, Namdo Chigitan, Yomo, Chigitan, Chigdo. The bag come Ludi, I would him and do Ludi Tempe Sem dea, Namdo Mabus in Delni Hugudo. I would him and do some Jetilication Chitagiora, Shinet of Sani. Oh, some day down the Halakesona, Lujiran Shichen. And the same days, things in Julian, Namdo Damandra Mambu Mangati, I would hear some say. Diligenta, Come some day Tambuki, Lai Luda, Sem those things in Tembo Sem Namdo Damandra, Tia would hear some the comne. And the call Lulis and Jada Tanikidu, Halia Jedu Yora.
So in non-Buddhist systems, non-Buddhist philosophical systems, they have this focus on the body as being a source of suffering, and in particular when they're engaged in the meditative systems, where they're engaged in trying, what's called we'll call samden, meditative stabilization is what I usually translate that as, and there's a kind of preparation for that, and then you attain this meditative stabilization. The first meditative stabilization is a what do you say, a state of existence in the form realm. So then, and that's a deity life, and so you're trying to attain that by thinking about how there's so many faults to having this body in the body that we have, and then they go through, in the non-Buddhist systems, they go through how all the
no, but Shiban you got to something you wish to do in the Kumgiora.
And that's also shared with the Buddhist system, that if you're going to try and be reborn or attain that higher meditative stabilization, I'm calling it meditative stabilization, the first level of the form realm, and be reborn as a form realm deity, then you have to engage in this kind of meditation to then see the faults of the body, and how all the suffering involved from having a body and having to feed it and having to take care of it, and how it brings us so much suffering, and so then, and based on that, then they also reflect on, well, it's because of the body then that we have all these thoughts that are, the afflictive emotions, the negative, or destructive emotions. All of these come up based on the body. So then thinking about all these faults, then they're able to then kind of, give up that existence abandon that existence, and then to be in doing this in higher meditative state, they are then able to be reborn into the form realm as a form realm deity on the first level, if we want to call it. It's called the first meditative stabilization. Teresa.
The Hindu Kasura, Ludico, Sherry Deji Pumbusons and Nale, and then Nanjandi Madrigan Busin that in the Mambush and Naza Mambuya, and it's Jumada Mambula Turko, and a Ludico good and that so Zeba, Tanya, Batishan, Bado, Exalasova, Tit and Daliaco, and it together Namdo that she can't Kanganguara. There's a co. Chakshin Chisak so lured, lulet and Tungayon at the Kanga Teleton Yungua, Kanga. The Indico Lude, so Papa to see by in it, Tana Shingi, Social Tunget and Gang, Tana Shingi, Suakazambo. No, the inner call Lude, Tinderes, Jako, Tabumaja, Tindiccio Mare, Lude Sachambure, Titone Yabuj Samlatana, and it's Shembang shoot him down, Shambata, Sola Soba, Tindecomia Tendo, Ludication Burese. The Yabuja Sungu, the Chakshin Chego Mare, the Ina Telia, Tambonet and Dalla Saya Tunya Soba, so what sort of exedo, then go raison.
So then it's we can see that the body that is what gives us so much trouble and difficulty and suffering comes from the body and also there's so many like microbes that exist, you can think, or even bacteria if you like, within the body, and then the body has to be supported by the four elements, constantly supported by the four elements, and those get out of, or for lack of a better word, out of whack, and then get what do you say, unbalanced, and then we have then based on that, then we get involved in the afflictive emotions, the destructive emotions, and then we suffer greatly, and so it's really attachment to this body that's giving us all this trouble, and the body really. Like the noble beings view the body as an enemy, as a foe, as we saw in that first verse. And so then, does that mean that we have to just, totally despise or denigrate the body? No, it means that because the body can also, as we saw, act as a framework within which we can attain, reach great attainments.
Hajan Chakba Shenji Chakba Chigio Marisio Mado, Sava Chigio Marisio Mara, Chamba the Sevet on the Taco Batico, Taco Vera, in a bag Naichi, something like Hagbar Shenja Shabati, Rungumari teach and Tungema Yungara. Oh, take it.
So, in that same vein, then, we're told not to be so attached to our relatives, our parents and children and so forth, and it's this excessive attachment that's being pointed out. It's not saying don't care for your close relatives. No, it's saying that it's this, what do you say, excessive attachment that is bringing us all sorts of suffering. So it's in the same way as we're thinking about the body. Then.
Oh yeah, tadi sholoka chukji de marangazo. Sholoka chukji de ba. Chukji.
Oh, no.
Oh, yeah.
So I think we stopped at verse 36.
Oh, tadi kasure. Oh, ngajo tumba ase. Niba. 동해 공주 개발 쉐바 쉐바 동해 공주 개발 쉐바 될 튼도가 튼나네다 듬바데다 동해 공주 개발 쉐베 동해베는 듬바데레스다.
So if you look at the topical outline on page 307, you notice that the B at the very no, not the B, sorry. The number 2 there says explaining extensively how to meditate on suffering. So this verse 36 on page, in the topical outline on page 308 is indicated as being the last of these kinds of meditations, and it says, it is therefore proper to develop aversion to the suffering nature of the body.
Oh yeah. Tako lu tungeji rangshin de re ko tungeji rangshin su tunge ngone re sigyo marde tungya warchin ge sigyo na tubu tenge ge ko shidilia tungeji tunge sigyo ra tande de tungya was so tunge imbe ke mare tungya was tungya warchin ge dis re sigyo lu tungeji rangshin de re se yin ko tewe gyu ku 동해 파 최수 요로 바셔서 고 르리아 교화제 고야 민두 삼기요라 민두 삼나 셰네 디마레세 근데 르 동해지 랑신 리아 교화제 바도 허바레스 디셰기도
So if we look at the thought or the assertion here, it says although the body's nature is suffering, causes of pleasure act as a remedy, therefore one need not feel aversion. Here, when we're talking about the body's nature is suffering, we're not talking about the feeling of suffering, okay? We're talking about that it is what gives rise to suffering. It's the idea of giving rise to suffering. So then, when we talk about something as having the nature of suffering, it has a nature of giving rise to suffering. So then. To say that pleasure acts as a remedy is, and you don't need to feel aversion or disenchantment, however, maybe aversion in this case, then that's not so. Okay? Well.
That didn't lose 동해 Geshe Yinaya ko tewe chesu yube ane kyoar chawa mares kyokuya ke yi kyona cheguya ke mares na te mirik disigwa kyoar chawa mirik ba mari kyoa ke kugurese tunge kene kyumangbo ne namtane shena nangyurba lu delia tunge ki kyumangbo so dewarese lu korang chane ja ne namana so naya dabtende shaya chi ne 중앙을 속바다 어떤데 견제 소소로 동에게 규망부 나와 줄바래서라 어떤이 또네 메남라 대외교다 남아서 대외교데 근데 동에게 규나신게 망부여바 마레스 대송다 류되게 동에 망부 규집에 차네 교화샤와 미안에 착버샤베네 마레스 어디 송다
So the verse then is saying that it's incorrect. You do have to have feelings of aversion with regard to the suffering is with regard to suffering, and from the body in particular here. There seem to be many causes of suffering like sickness and others, but humans do not seem to have as many causes of pleasure. So here the body has many causes of suffering. There's the illnesses that we have to undergo, and then on top of that there's the imbalance, the dependence upon the four elements to sustain the body, and then the four elements becoming out of, getting out of balance. So then many other things as well, but so then it's much more difficult than for humans to have causes that bring about pleasure. So it is appropriate then to feel aversion to suffering.
Oh yeah, that they go to me mambo juchevares, petelia, nipena, kaji gabe pomo, rangi chunda, castle, kimdala, tondonive, tunge mambo and ravashinus. Lumbaji gabu yavashara, and de pomote, and then namataya, and then me mambo colia, tinganzul, koyanganzul, singing mambo yana, and then meji ko. Nama language such a tapsi chavina, Toya Pekawar, Tunge Mambu Yango Chigres, Mambo Sangachanga, or a cold Tainako, Sundresi Tapsi Chivana Shires.
So we have the example here of a certain man, means somebody who's a part of the kingdom of this king, and wanted a king's daughter as his wife, and because of that he got involved in a lot of suffering. So for somebody to then marry the king's daughter, you have to go through all sorts of trials and so forth, trials and tribulations, if you will, and so then this man then got involved in a lot of suffering.
This one, oh yeah, Tadilia Sumba de Redua, Sumba Tewa Rangzamba Yuva Kaba said Redua. Oh, didn't Tawade, Koya Deva de la Rangzamba, Tawangonechi Yobade, Takasur. Koya de Koalia, Tewa Rangzamba Yomares, Koalia Tungede, Tungerangzamba Yomares, or Dishekdua, so that Tewa Rangzamba Yuva Kaba de Tanzania Ngandua. So
then, this next verse, if you look on page 308 at the outline, this next verse begins a section on what we call refuting the existence of real pleasure. It's the actual pleasure, something. The assertion being that actually our bodies and so forth have a nature of there is such a thing as actual pleasure, and then there's a counter assertion here that there is no such thing as real pleasure. Or actual pleasure. There's actual suffering, but there's not actual pleasure.
But Towarang Zamba, Tungerang Zamba says to what? Oh, the Rangitsani Jutuva, the Rangwin Truva, the Tendelsigi Mare.
So when we're talking about real pleasure, actual pleasure, we're not talking about the philosophical viewpoint of pleasure as somehow existing in its own right. That's not what we're talking about.
Kangen de so samlu nal kangen de jam chiyo bache ani tima chungru do kap de leako so samlu ko pa tawa samgi ware sera tawa lomba samres o ti sonza ko tawa rangchamba yo mares tungye de so samlu na kangen chiyo bache te ko me de chi samde ne o ti de ma kangen de ma chungru jin do so na o ta ya bo de so samje tawa lomgi ware. This one, the water Rangzamba Marisha. So the same teaching to the Bao, Tayawachum, some Kawache, Tawasha, your race. Koya Dungeji, Yona, Dungedico, Dungerare, some Gisua Mare, Cabre to Nazar Dangana, Nazata de Grimado, Capsuni, near Sambesures, Dungemevi Yomara. Cocatina, Tunge, Judy, Yona, Tunge, Dungeran de Yore. Koya Devade, Dagenti. Children to let the Lomba Mado, could you the Daga Ranja Deva Yenaya, could Deva Degmar, Persian June, to get it. 그래서 뭐 디제다 대화랑 젬바요 말에 동해랑 젬바요 레세 디스기요래.
So then, why are we talking about that? To use the translation term here, that suffering is real and pleasure is not real. For pleasure, then we're always looking for it, and we're getting very what do you say? Maybe you could say like worked up to have some pleasurable or experience, and then if we then have that pleasurable experience, then if when the mind calms down a little, if you look what's under that, then it's really that we just have exaggerated, maybe is a good word, or anyway, it's I think exaggerated is one word that I found. We exaggerate that that's happiness. Okay, after a little while, it just sort of fades, and then we again experience suffering. So. Suffering itself is not like that. If somebody, if a doctor takes a long needle and gives you a shot in your shoulder, that hurts, that's pain, and there's no way that you can think of it in such a way that it's going to not be painful, So then, you don't have to, what do you say? Pain or suffering does not depend on just being, somehow created by our thought, by our mind, right? In the way that pleasure does, and it does, and then pleasure just sort of fades away and is replaced by again by pain or suffering. The word pain and suffering are used interchangeably, really.
그거라 오늘 마 용기를 봐. 변다시거라. 미직 도디 키제 뽕바 디간데 도디 샤제. 근데 키제 타르 못는 디시라 나기로 봐. 나서네 어디 야자지 수조들 수샤나 거 대화 저렇게. 그래서 디나를 숙천번 냄자 되게 동해디 야우를 신사. 근데 거다 야구 중송 삼버마도 야 딩걸고 동해지 연구 쭉 살아 봐. 그래서 거기 떡인데 야우를 신버디가 왔다 야구 중송 삼비어래. 어디 나시고 미지 갈래 잡제 콤바르 잡친친친친 갈래 시작하는 또전 예수 제베라서는 아테페 대화처럼 되긴 돈에 갈래티마 초르로자코 대화처럼 그 대화랑 챵바이네 단다고 가제 대나 티나신 대하고래 디대기 말해 버르지 거의 다 말아 아마 대셔서는 거야 랑구에서 우주시기로 어제 디나신데 다 거의 대화세 간가.
So a couple of good examples of what we mean by worldly happiness or mundane happiness is somebody who's carrying a big load, like our workers down here carrying one of those. I'm just thinking like that. They have those cement bags. Those are very heavy. A very heavy load on your shoulder. Then it gets very painful. So then you go, maybe I'll switch to the other shoulder, and you switch on the other, put it to the other shoulder. This shoulder starts to feel a little lighter, a little better, and you go, that's so much better. You get a feeling of pleasure. But then over this side, that shoulder, in fact, is starting to feel the same kind of pain. Is just beginning over there. So. And the same thing happens to Niba did. So then if somebody is walking a long distance, and then you're walking, you get really tired, then you sit down. Oh, and then you feel a lot better just sitting down. Oh, this is a lot better, but it's not going to stay that way. Somebody says, "Well, I can't sit like this for so long." You know, if you're walking with somebody, and they say, "I can't sit like this so long," and time to get up, and so then you have to get up. If it was actual pleasure, okay, then you would be able to, in the sense, well, actual, I'm using it interchangeably with the word used here, real. If it's real pleasure, then it just should be pleasurable all the time while you sit there, but it's not. It fades. Well,
뭐 되네시다 원에 용구다. 칼라를 세트고 싶어서 또 되요나. 아니 칼라를 지라스나 앞에 신부 뺐다가 주청사. tako seje dena parji kyuba juesa dura la ko di dagingi tokba di shu chimbe ti ma chung du de ata pe ki chung sam ta sa de kanga ya chung sam gera.
So we'll be talking about this later on here, but this is also the same thing happens when you're eating food. If it's really good food, then you go, oh, this is wonderful, and it's a great pleasure. But then if you eat more and more, then pretty soon you're going to feel nauseous, and so it brings suffering, and so it's very similar to the idea of walking and then sitting down. That these are what do you say? That you can't continue on with these activities, and they're eventually going to change into a suffering situation.
Miraj Navayana, Soraj Navayana, Soshidan Hadava. Soshidan Amjia Koshit in the Chesson, that pay you some. Dehatsurgitwa. The so Nadavi to get is a commerce at Dehatsora. That didn't see Nimachik they need and coach to get Dehatsurgumidwa.
So I have personal experience of this one. When you get a toothache, then you're like in a lot of pain and discomfort for a few days, and then you go to the dentist yanks the tooth, and then you go, oh, this is great, I'm much happier now, and you have a pleasurable feeling, but that lasts just for a couple of days, and then it fades.
Koe dewe dewe judi daga dena dewa de rangja degi mare ko dewe judi daga neshi yona ko paruji dunge jundu yore dunge koe dunge june ko dunge judi yona dunge rangja degi mado dunge judi yoshindu dewa yure yo marwa sa ko koe dunge de dunge ngone re dewa de soso samlo pha sebe lombe dewa jire sigi yora.
So then if we look at and compare pleasure and pain, then pleasure then will last, if it's together with its causes there, it will last for a certain time and then fade. But it's not the same for pain. If it's there with its causes, then it's going to stay that way. Therefore, we say that pleasure is something that we've just sort of created with our own thought, but it's not the same for pain or suffering.
Oh yeah, odi indu kasur tatunda ko ngarazu tungeji sikwa tungeji tunge tede ko tunge ngo na ya da shi na tanju ta tzu kanga ha ko tunge dira dawade jure tunge sikwa dawade ngarazu dewa yin samge yore ta tande se aneshi ko dewa ko sore sorge yore de ko daga deg mar ko jur sone tunge re do da san jure tunge se gwade ko ngone ge dewa ran sem ba che mare dewa ran sem ba che na dewe judi yo na dewa daga ran de gure ti ma de je ko paru jil ti ke mare sam tunge ngo jo do da so ko jure tunge se tira.
So then when we talk about suffering of cyclic existence, we often talk about the suffering of pain or the suffering of suffering as one, and this is something that animals and even animals know. It's just suffering or pain is suffering. So it's, what do you say? Sometimes people say actual suffering, something like that. That's just what we experience, and it's the feeling, the feeling of suffering. So then there's the suffering of change, and suffering of change is what we're talking about in terms of pleasure being just something that's a temporary situation, and that even it has all the causes and assembled for it, that it just fades, and so that's referred to as the suffering of change. Yeah, that it changes from pleasure or happiness to a nature of, it shows that there's a nature of suffering. It just reverts to its natural state of suffering.
당당하게 서셔버리시래세. 탈베 대화에는 민주래 대화래세. 자 거하게 내려lon지 표심 좀 가리에나요. 그 요네 동에기 규칙이요래. 거에 대화 컨디션에 그 동에기 시식이요래세. 어디 숨겨라.
So then when we're talking about the true about suffering here in the context of pleasure, then pleasure is really this what do you say? The suffering of change. We sort of, it's dependent upon our. The pleasure is dependent upon our sort of thinking that this is a pleasurable system. This is a pleasurable experience, and then but it slowly fades, and then it reverts to this nature of suffering and pain.
No, that 동해 주디 다가 대서놓고 동해 랑시 대도 마도 동해 대와 주야 유면도 와. 그리고 대와대 대외 주디 다가 대네 버루실이야 아삼 타케 말에삼 대월 대금도 와 동해에도 와. 어디 개반도 와.
So there's a big difference then with that and how suffering, if it's all assembled, or the suffering of cyclic existence, if we, well, I just remembered in the former statement that Geshe was saying, well, it's that, because of that fleeting nature of the what do you say, contaminated suffering, or the suffering of cyclic, I mean the pleasure, or the pleasures, the temporary pleasure of cyclic existence, or then how it changes, then we're seeking the unchanging or the eternal happiness or pleasure of liberation. So then it's suffering. Then is not like that kind of. It's unlike pleasure in the sense that once it has all those causes assembled there, it's not going to fade. It just the causes just continue to give rise to new, further experiences of suffering.
That never bands my share with Tandanga do it to share to Karshavin some take what they actually share. I won't know any good. Did you love Kabbalah sometime in Shologa?
So I'm just going to look at the Geneva Marabe.
Geneva Tungela de Onzimila.
Well, Geneva de.
That is. Patient by a devala, standing in my hand on your that under a love that you love that Joshua. Oh, that under the banjo, to that this year you are cinema. The banjo, my own living good essay. Oh,
yeah, so I'm just going to, I was just sort of covering up to and quickly now, and then where we've been up to now. So now we'll start again at that. What at that next?
Oh yeah, that's somebody they were on Semba. You have a Kakbalanga Sigua. Or Korea, they were the Tarba the Tamji Kimbetobe, they were the Sigomara. Korea, they were the let they were on Semba, you have a Kakbalangasi. Tunga on Semba, you again. Rangi Seni, they were on Semba Meva study. Koe, they were on Semba Meva, Tunga on Semba, you have a tele, Tunzanga, when they shake doa. Odima Panch and that, and the Tambu to shake ora. Tambu the goddess of Tambu, Tunga on Semba, you Rangi Seni Meva. There were Junse Pewa Tongue, Ransembe, there were you ever Mindrube, you said, she just do it to my Tambu. There were Junse Pewa. Tongue Sigua. There was the Abbey and was done with Chunju Jet in it, there was church and the Wasigora. You ever say, and Ransembe, there were you ever Mindrube, you sense. Ransembe, there were your, there was Chunju Jina, there was church and do this one that there were Ransemba, your Samna, Marese. There was the Chunju the Abbey, Yenaya, Ransembe, there were your Mares, Tishegdoa.
So here, to go back to the outline on page 308, then it says, showing that though real suffering exists, real pleasure does not. As part of the refuting the existence of real pleasure. And so with this verse 37, it says, reasons why seeing a slight increase in pleasure does not prove the existence of real pleasure. There's no proof through just a slight increase.
Oh, this one's a call. Dewa Ransemba Manani, Pewa, the Dewa ya parent and what did Rigimare. This one's a Dewa Pewa Yubeshana, Ransemba Moniji Dewasidua. Moniji Dewas. Moniji Dewas the Kora, Dewa Mangazu Kewadilia, Moniji Kewasero. Pena. Deba said, Chamba said, Sawa said, Moniji Kewara. Matakale, Luigi, oh, Kerayabure, Series Lavina, Moniji Kewakemare, Kulung Tagua, Kulungi Kewasa Jungua, Kewa de la Kulunga, Lunga Kewa to Mansha Kulunga Kewa to Oh, Tene, Chimba, Chudim Seba, Sarah Chitezutade, Moniji Kewara. Oh, so I was in the Koran, Shinji Kokewara. And that is Kulunga Kewaria, or Dination, Moniji, Dewa Mare said, or Tinded of Chicago on dinner.
So then, this suffering that, what is said here, we're talking about pleasure and the existence of a pleasure that somehow exists by nature as pleasure. Okay, there's some. It's similar to the idea when we talk about this idea of by nature that there's some virtues, for instance, that are like love, compassion. These kinds of states of mind are by nature virtuous, but it's not the same for like if we engage in some virtuous action, say that kind of virtue is not by nature virtuous, but by its motivation, by the intention, it's virtuous. So here we're talking about a pleasure that's by nature pleasurable, something. So then it's not the pleasure that we experience in samsara is not by nature pleasure. We're kind of trying to create a pleasurable situation for us, and then we are able to create it, and then we go, this is, we have to use we exaggerate it, or it's almost like we're creating it with our own mind that, this is very pleasurable, and then it just fades.
Dewa said, Dewa Shaya Shagurwako, and then Dewa Yomarve, Dunga Yomarve Suneti, Dewa message Yomarti, Tanya Quata Gresum, Chidan Dewa Yori, in a Dewa Yindadi, Hokaresne, Gangeji Chundra Doata, Dindekablia, Susa Samlukva, Lomba Samlet, Dewa Shagures. Dewa say Karesne, Sosa, Lusimla Pembe Suji Yudi Yonsuna, Dewa Sigara. Sosa Lusimla Nebe Suji Yudi Yonga Telsuna, Dunga Sigara. Sosa Lusimla Penake Medusam Yonsuna, Chua Tangum Sigdua. So I call Yonda, they go, Taya which was on Aliasam. Sosa Lusimla Pembe Suji Yudi Yongiora, and Dewa Soga, till Dewa Sigara. In a Dewa Yinda, the Money Dewa Maris or this.
We're not denying the existence of pleasure or happiness. In general, pleasure and happiness are something that we experience. To deny that there is such a thing would be to deny, conventional existence. There is such a thing as certainly as the feeling of pleasure and happiness, but what's being refuted here is that kind of happiness exists. Actual, real happiness. But what was I saying? By nature, pleasure, and so then instead, it's really just. Maybe another alternate way of translating that idea that Geshe is trying to communicate is that when we're sort of we undergo kind of, it's really, gange means like difficulties to create a happy or a pleasurable situation for us, and then we can even say the stress of those difficulties lessen, then we say, we can say at that time, this is great. I'm happy. It's something that we're creating by our, by thought.
Tatunda Dewa Ramsemba Maina, Dewa Shagures. Dewa Shagu, Dewa de Garizani, you did social Lusimla Pembe, social Yonsona, and Dewa Shagura. Echo the Ginde, social Lusimla Pembe, Yons, or Taya would have so some Cocabuchon. Dewa Shagu, Dewa Messigo, my Shagures.
Yeah. So, just to summarize it, in general, we're not saying that there's no such thing as pleasure. We're just saying there's no such thing as real pleasure or pleasure by its own nature. Anything that benefits our body and mind, and we have this feeling of pleasure or happiness, then we're leaving that as we call that pleasure, happiness. We're not denying that, but we are denying that there's some kind of real or pleasure that exists by its own nature.
This one?
This one.
Oh yeah. Only Dewa Yodo Shenas, only Dewa Yomares, Garesne, patient by Dewa Lese, Chidar Dogba Tong Yurbase, Tedar Dunge patient. Dogba Yoba Maino Sedo. Sako, Moni Gawa Yenas Gora, and Kone Kondo, patient bed Dewale, Chidaran Dogba, Tatunda Dilo Mosikiran. Patient by the one of the Teve, Judy Kota, patient, Debbie in there, but we should look at Dunga to do share. Oh, yeah. Tunge Judy Daga Debbie in a co-personal, Tungera Degrimado, Tunge Judy Daga Den, Tower to Medusa. Oh, this one, Oniji, Dawayoma Resua.
So then, this verse says, with the intensification of pleasure, its opposite is seen to occur. With the intensification of pain, there will not likewise be its opposite. So once pleasure is, once we have a pleasurable feeling with all its causes and conditions assembled there, even though they are assembled there, that it gradually fades and we experience suffering. That's not the case with pain, okay, with suffering. If we use those terms interchangeably, then when pain is there and assembled with all its assembled causes, then it's going to continue to be painful and suffering. It's no way that it's somehow going to then change into pleasure.
Oh yeah. That depends, yeah. And the appeal so not to get into this saddle. Pena Jabo Galeno Jazingi Tenchen Debe Wood once. Jabo Galeno de Miche and it Jazingia. Ya teacher, Jazin the Cossack, but it's a lie, Lendrin Barra, the Geshe Yeshe Thabkhe, Jazin Korangi, Tida Chikba Yamdo, there go US and Barra. And they call my Debe Kamlama, Milumba, Lundrin, but what didn't she? The Aryadeva, she said, Masinama Durandra, or the Geshe Yeshe.
And then, the example is of King Mandata, who fell because he wanted Indra's half of the throne and was not content to share power with him. I guess this is a story of this king who rose to such great heights that he was sharing the throne. It's like literally, I think, sharing the seat with Indra. And then he wasn't content with that, and so as a result of this discontent, and he was then, pushed back, if we can think of him as falling down from that heavenly realm into the human realm.
Tawaran Semba Cheve Guyoma Resti Shegdoa. No. Kendan Lenji Devale, Doba Tongi, Tungelase. Kenam Yeda Lenji do, Doba Yoba Maino, start again the Chibati. Tawagi Judan Kento to the Lenji do, Yoba Yenaya, and Tawadele, Tawaran Madeva says, Donny Dungaging or you do to us or that. Doba Tongi. Tungela Kenam Yeda Lenji do, Tungela Tungegi. Good I can't do there, you're not legend to there, you're not. Only to me, the Daware and Dawatindea, dog by your Maino, say. Oh, this on the code, Dungede, Ransembare, Kona Judy, you're not to me around there. Dawade, the way Judy, the Tampunashi, you're not, they will take me to get into the answer. Or they do Dawa Ransembame, to get Ransemba your race.
So this next verse is within the same section, and if you look on page 308, it says, although there are causes producing real suffering, there are none producing real pleasure. So the idea is here that very similar to the previous verse, saying that, with the conditions for pleasure, its opposite is seen. With the conditions for pain, there is not its opposite. So there's no way that pleasure with its conditions assembled there's no way that suffering with its conditions assembled together are going to somehow change into pleasure, but the having pleasure and its conditions assembled together, that changes into suffering.
Pedelia, Kebunyang make up the called Sungan Shoimbro, Sumbadesa, Sunga Yamga was in Kishoimbre, Sungam Kibusachi. A called Tambu Sumba to their drone, Korachalam Karjan, and Cheshu, Kibushagumbre. Teneco, Tamra Tanje, Tamako to Buche Yangu Yombra, what did I say?
So the example here is of King Ashoka's prison that he called the pleasant abode, where the prisoner was asked, well, what would you really like? And then and the prisoner chose, well, I'd like to do whatever. I'd like to sit down, or I'd like to walk, or whatever. He was then, he or she was then made to do that continually, and so that then until it eventually became very painful. I think that Gamma, Chitina Doctrina Dutra Dandashana.
Oh yeah, so that's why.
Maybe a time for questions here. Anybody had any questions?
If people don't ask questions, they'll think that something's happening that
maybe you understand everything. Either that or you understand everything. Yeah?
I can write this down, but I'll just ask
not stupid questions.
briefly. The question was, you were explaining how pleasure is fleeting and based on conventions, right? That it is conventional reality, that pleasure is the causes and conditions, and isn't that also the case for suffering?
Oh, maybe, yeah. Maybe you didn't quite get what I was being to say, but and so then I don't quite understand your question. So then it's a good question, but are you thinking then is pleasure and suffering both equally, what do you say, conventionally existent, or is that what you're thinking? Yeah. That's Hagoma song. Then they drew the Yakpo Young Yakpo Rang Young do Yin and Ko. They were the Tanya do Yutan, then Kema did Tanya do Yubit, what's a D Gakpa Gapki Yoma race. Then they Ko Kojana, then they Dungal Young Tanya do Yuba. Ray, then they did like Gakpa young Jagio Manawa. Dungal Kaisa Kunto de Yoba did Gapa Gapio Mane.
Tanda Karasuarasana Chiba Deva said the Korangaranzu Deva said, you so that Reja Kandeshumina, oh, Nayabuchung, some Suzu and Samlia. Tambuchung so covered Yabuchung so some nuts or there was a yada. Or so Luid and Samlia, or the Yawoman do some there. Tongues a yada. Zeko, Taring Buchilin draw, and then yes, Jasona, Tanga Yabuchung so some, so boy, Kibuchung, some Kibuchung, some, there was Surgitwa. Zeko, the one on the the Washa would rest, the one on the rest. I know Taring Buchin Kaleka and Ma Devate. The Waran Semba did Dagaran, Deva did Judy Sana, the Daga Degri was in the Degmidwa. You knew Sheparusilia, Tenjidia, Lons, Malaj, Derson, Metangaya, Lango Sigra. Or this Sigdwa. Dunga Delaco, Dunga Chuina, Buddhist Sojana, Sokasa Jamna, Co Saji Degrimado. They were Rekemidwa. So, Chaban to Asigara.
So when we're talking about the conventional existence of happiness, for instance, we had that example of somebody walking and then getting really tired and then having to sit down and go, oh, this feels so great. We're not debating with that, okay? That in fact, what you're feeling there is from a conventional, it's an agreed on convention with all of us that we can call that happiness, that's pleasurable at that point. What is being said about what is being said then is that it can't stay that way. Okay, it can't. It's not actual or real or happy, but pleasurable by nature, because it's going to change. What happens is you can't sit forever, so you have to get up and move again. So then the reason you have to get up is because it changes into this discomfort or suffering. So then we can't call it can't be called real or real suffer. When I say real pleasure or real real happiness, it's something. It just changes. But it's not the case with suffering. When the causes for suffering are all assembled, say if you get stung by a bee, right? If you get stung by a bee, then wasps actually do this. Like if they keep on stinging you, and then it's going to be painful until that bee stops stinging you. You have, as long as the causes are assembled there, that you're going to continue to feel pain. So it's different.
Mobichi Miji Lepsona, Midi Leko, Kabu Yungeshina, or Koleps Samjako, Kawa Turgera, Lucin Le Pembesi Turgedwa, Magagasino, I made to shut the Lepson as Dunga Turgedwa. So goes the Suzu Sodanji here,
So then, when conventionally, when they talk about conventional, it's like if somebody we like comes for a visit, then and then we're told, whomever, Frank came to the door, is at the door, and then we feel kind of pleasure because it's something that we're feeling some benefit to our mind and body. That's we could think of that as like the definition of conventional pleasure. But then if somebody who we don't like comes to the door, and somebody says, whatever, Mike is at the door, then we immediately feel unhappy, and it's some kind of an unhappy feeling because there's some kind of harm coming to our body and mind, right? It's not benefit. It's like harm coming to the body and mind. Therefore we're feeling, we have a different, feeling that comes, and that's called suffering, right, or pain. So and those are an agreed upon convention of all of all whatever humans, right?
No, do matter. Tandako Yujigina Cabrico Dawa Surger Cabri Tonga Surga Sodan Kebastoa. So
then you can look at it from the viewpoint of just the feeling, right? The feeling. And the feeling and how we think at that time. Okay, and that's what is what we consider, and conventionally we've agreed that is happiness and that is suffering. Yeah. Das shi gör det.
Ja, det bara det. Jag gör det nu kun nyam då lämnar ni jag gör.
Ja, det.
Yeah.
Okay, then Dini Yaborwa. That's the Dungal, the young Semki Su Yoma the Bay, Karis and the Mi Rere like because the Dungal the Dungal ki church mi rere la dungal kegi oma de because dungal we church chik yuna then mi rere la dungal kegi oma de mi kashe tam dungal dila dene dungal kegi de then mi send out de k jegi ma de k oma because nala k jegi men do because send the Leka Shuk Chambo J did the me chikla nugirwa. The me send out Shuk Chambo yin son then ko Leka J tugirwa. Then they dungawa ma de Leka Jigba then me chikba then they ko jena or chichena the young Semki Tsu Yoma the Bay, the Dungal de young, because they were the Dungal Semki Sergi Yorwa, then they Dungal the young Semki Tsu Yoma the Bay.
Oh, Tindel Amarwa. Oh, Ko Dagi Delia, Chidanda Ko Dunga Chijung that Tindel Suzu Samla Tonjo Keta Yorwa. Misilipena Minil Tunge Danta Chungayina. Chikba, Kangi Chikba Chungayina. Chik Delico Pena Languali, Chavara Shevita, and it to Chaland of Zella, Minil La, Shera. Niga di La Torchen. Chidiga Atapes as Santunga Champishira. Chide Dake Mariusha Samko Tunga Mara. Did it? Chavayora. Inako Dagi Tunge. Kapsugar and now Chineko Dungeki Judy unit Dunga de Taga Degua. The new Kabachi Yora. Mother Chida Kashil Dunga Yon Kashi Dunga Meti Chavayora. When the sugar Samlutan get Chineko, Juro Dugar Chunsunako, Dungeli Jurgi Marwa, the younger subject, sort of Gudwa. Mission that is Madu Dunga Dungaji Dunga, simply members in your Basha and Yagayora.
So the question is, since not everyone finds the same things painful, isn't what we label painful also created by our minds? Well, if we think about, it's true that two people won't be able to, we'll have a different reaction to a painful situation. Say if the two people are walking down the road and carrying their stuff with them, and then get in a huge downpour, and both of them, their things are totally ruined. One will get very upset, and the other one will say, "Oh, it doesn't matter. I didn't really need it anyway," or whatever. That just doesn't matter to them. Or for somebody who's practicing the Dharma, then they're able to forbear a difficult situation, whereas other people who undergo the same difficult situation would get very anxious and even lose their mental stability. That's true. There is that difference, but we're not talking about that. We're talking about whether there's pleasure by nature or suffering by nature. It's talking about that once those causes are assembled together, like when the example was, I've had this experience, so that's why I keep on talking about a wasp. But some insect biting you, and then it doesn't go away. Once you have the causes that are assembled there for the pain or the suffering, then then it won't, it just continues to be suffering, whereas it's not this, and therefore suffering is is by nature suffering, and whereas because and that's not the same for pleasure or happiness. It's just assembled there by causes, but then it can change into suffering.
Donda ko mini lega danda chabina. Chigdi dunge chorgore chigdi dunge chorge marwa. Ko chibudele dunge me mara kale yori chibude dunge chor cha cho sorwa. So go jo yendu tos kale ma kai. Chibude so tanda namgi lega senge yenza ko tos kale kai ji marina ko dunge chunjuji yore. Mese devja o tanga kale ka samza tengi o marma do. Tanda to chene ko le chigba yungro. Ko shile dunge yoba de chigbare. Ko semlia dosi ngona ngwe sete leda dunge ngwen de chunga de chelso de chaba yungura.
So I gave the example of I was trying to illustrate the question by, did I ever say what the question was? I hope so. No, I didn't. I think I did. Yeah, so I was saying about two workers, that they were undergoing the same job, working very hard, physical labor, and for one person it was so difficult, and the other person it wasn't difficult for them at all. But in fact, both of them are experiencing some kind of difficulty in that situation. There's some kind of pain or suffering, but the one is just able to, overcome those difficulties because of, either mental or physical abilities, whereas the other one can't do that. So there is a basis for pain, and they're both sharing some sort of pain or difficulty. Maybe this is a good opportunity to go to this question, though. I'll just read it to you and then translate it to Geshe, so I know I've done that. When our bodies are painful and uncomfortable, how can we use the pain to let go of attachment rather than having the pain distract us from practice? Sounds like somebody was meditating for a long time. That's sometimes that's a super base because they suit yagi do didn't got to day kapore didn't because not a dangi or not a day kanjais because that's a teaching they do chu jagi or they didn't chu jay do they that's a day kapore jay that's a not a de Shencha mebachi Shencha yutan then a day took him and do Shencha the countries meba surgore kojena de ngejena kod gomla degi or then it comes to super the natsa dangi duga then it kojena de natsa de Shencha yutan then it natsa de be shukchamba dangi or de
Karel Shencha is as well.
Shencha sigi or what they use to let go. Natsa de dangi or de then it can't de natsa la then a Shencha chunu dang tugi de Shencha sena. And kojena de
Nasa tangi yore share komje kangba du shen nasa tangrwa.
Right.
Da karjare.
Right. Then it called did Shenchaki gun kasa lula Shenchayina mishe lula Shenchaki gun. Then it did Natsa Dangwe did Kanjes Shencha Chungru Dangwe Kanjes Kojena de Suba Tupna, because Natsa the Sur Tupna, then it Kongi Shenjak Chunu Drogirwa, Sur Tupna. Then it Kandre Sur Tuba Chit Jagore.
Oh, that Kumbre Captain Naza Mambutan, Naja de Sur Tuba Karcha would say.
And then Kandre Sur Tupgure.
Oh,
an exact translation of this is difficult to do. So then the way I asked the question was, well, if you're sitting in meditation and you have a lot of pain, and it's because you're kind of attached to your body, then it's hard to, that kind of idea is maybe hard to translate. So what I said was, how do you bear the pain? You know, how can you bear the pain or the difficulty?
Oh yeah, tako tena komres kyap gyunada chöchi gyunada yurung bute da tende kale yongura. Oh yongura. Mute ko so to be ko ta ti tene tanglen ji Sravasti yora. Tende to yongure samte kayo marasam. Muzu tanda meba kale khatse kyap gyore. Ra Mingda Jiraya da Tunda Meba Tundalia Kali Shivjakudwa. Lucia Pede Shina Lutange Kali Captiva. Oh, Church Tundalere, Tindetos collection, the Tigwa Mambutagiore, some Tunetang Linges Savachora, or did the younger Samsa or Marasamsa Chora. And Nivadelia, or Church Tundalia, their Kaletes Japtuvadege, Tigwa Mambutagere some. Tende samdamra. Shada nazadayenu ko ujushida jabgeke amara. Knowledge tendigra. Yang jat komdigra.
So if we use the example of the meditator, then there's is this working? I'm not sure. I'd keep on either I chew on it or I put it too far away. So so then it's one of the three kinds of patience. There's the patience of what do I say? Patience towards somebody who's doing you harm. Patience sort of disregarding harm. Neba jiang mi sambe soba de sumka yang yor sonuna.
Sumde lo machide chula. Kaya sere. Nezi la chiminya beso basera.
Yeah, la de.
Neba jengel kolke malab da yusho samke umar so kumera.
Yeah,
Tunge tangling soba so tos kanle chune te ta yo samke umar sam tandulangi ora. Ane chelenge simbi soba sa te chug tandal kale tos jabgur mezu tanda che mengel kale tos mingi yoya tandal tam yoya tandal kale shu jagdwa. Ngara chug tandal degree samjara. O tanda de maje shida nagdone uzu jagumar wa to sha digra.
So there's three kinds of patience or tolerance or forbearance, and one of them is not what do you say? It's sort of not sort of disregarding is the only word that it comes. But it has a negative connotation. Disregarding the harm somebody has done to you. It's just a way of not thinking so much about the harm that somebody is doing, and then. The other is accepting, is the patience or forbearance of sort of accepting suffering. And then there's the patience or forbearance of ascertaining or what do you say, coming to certain knowledge about the teachings. And so in this case, when you're you're really thinking about how to accept the suffering, and when you're accepting the suffering here, if you say your body is really bothering you greatly, then you can think about how, say if you're doing meditation, then think about how there are many people who undergo great suffering and difficulty for much smaller or lesser reasons or purposes than I, and so then I should be able to bear this, small suffering in order to, increase my meditation, and then you could also think, well, this suffering that I'm undergoing is the result of some former destructive actions or bad karma, and now it's getting, used up, and so sort of just make yourself feel good about that your bad karma is being burned off, is the way we talk about it. But then also, if it's just too painful, it's better to give up and get up, and and come back to the meditation. So there's the
Shadu Zanko Kabeton Shagua. Oh, Dakale some Denishan Mandira. Echema Kumdisa Kale Yungra. Oh, those Komna Dixeria, some Kuyang Burichitone, Kabeton Shavina, Mamba Kumdisa Yang Kumito Yorsigua.
But it's important if you're going to get up from the meditation in that case to do it with joy, and we use the word joy. It's just sort of be happy about it. Say, I did a good job meditating. Just don't think it's just like, oh, this is so difficult, and then get up, and then you won't want to come back again. So you have to end it with a feeling of a good feeling about it, and so then you can return to the meditation with the same kind of enthusiasm.
Kaletos Kale, Odirikom Del, Kaletos Kas, the Yabuchonso, Sugaton Tos Kale Captos, Yabuchonso.
So you can just sort of, be happy about it. Say, oh, today I did something to, to improve my practice of the Buddha's teachings, and I undertook some hardship to do it. And that was really worthwhile, and then I'll continue to do that. You just sort of create a kind of a positive state of mind when you get up from your meditation.
Yeah,
you think, oh, I just got rid of a lot of bad karma, a lot of former wrongdoing, and now I created a lot of good virtues, so I did a good job. You have to feel like that. Is it 11? That truth's long, so Chick Shagna, Chick Yoborova.
Oh, yeah, love gay love.
One of them is a quick answer. Damba ne gena de in the motivation in the beginning, selflessness and emptiness are mentioned. Is this to emphasize the emptiness of person and emptiness of things? Gena damba ne de toma kasa damba ne de kasa Jailamagi Sikche de Dumbarwa, then they do Dongba dan Dangmeba Gorla Sungba, Dongba dan Dangmeba, the Dangmeba send the Kansaki Dangmede, then a Dongba send the Chugi Dangmede.
The Maringa Kaslamba, don't the Dil Tangmi said, Tangmil Tara New Yora, da Tumu Hachana, Takasuri. Tumajina Rangja to be Savigita Suda, Kansa, do de Bada Chidama, Samzamba Kanga, Kansa Dami Seshora, de nga sede rangya tu ba nga rangi sobo da sem da sora pasha ne nga rangi yoba tabshidwa rangya tu be sewi gi da si wara so phungbu dina le ya rangya tu be nga yo ma res gi wara kares ne phungbu da rangya tu be da phungbu nga bo re ndi rangya tu be da re ndi je phungbu nga bo de rangya tu be da gi ngo yo ma res wara da me ba si de sobu da ma re so da ma re do shi da ma do shi na ma shi da ma res gi wara 다음에 봐서 들으세요. 그래서 봐 찍도 매 봐대. 풍부가 버려래 다 찍도 매 봐대. 랑게도 다 찍도 매 봐. 동아시도자 풍부가 버려래 다 랑게도 다 백화가 전들에 매 봐대. 제 현지 동바시도.
맞아.
들 현지 동바시도.
맞아.
돈다 가서 풍부 최제 풍부가 버 최제 저 랑게도 다요 말레스. 매대 랑게도 다데 풍부레레레레 랑게투베 다경오 투네 요마레스 풍부레 로스 코 랑게투베 다 제현지 동바체네 요마레스 거라
so actually the emptiness and the selflessness here is talking about the self in the sense of Rangyotuba means a self-sufficient self that's somehow it's a sense that we get about the self as being self-sufficient, and so if you focus on that and establish a kind of logical reason for it not to exist in that way, that it couldn't possibly exist in that, the self couldn't possibly exist in a self-sufficient way, you have to say, because it could neither be the same as the five aggregates or different from the five aggregates. And so when you say it's the same as the five aggregates, you go through each of the five aggregates and say, well, that, feelings are not a self-sufficient self, discriminations are not a self-sufficient, compositional factors are not a self-sufficient self, form is not a self-sufficient self, consciousness is not a self-sufficient self. You go through those and that's what's known as selflessness, okay? So then when you switch over to this idea of it being completely different from the five aggregates, then that's when you find that it couldn't possibly exist different from the five aggregates, then you are coming to the conclusion that it's empty, okay? The emptiness comes in there. It's empty of being some kind of a entity that exists separate from the five aggregates.
다 유스들 풍부한도와 아야 다음에 봐 랑게트베 다된 데 랑게트베 다 말데 랑게트베 담데 랑게트베 담데 랑게트베 다 경우 말데 랑게트베 다 말이스네 다음에 봐 시거 들랍다.
So if you in general then if you look at the five aggregates and say each one is if we talk about selflessness, we're going through is this, we take each of the five and say, is this the self-sufficient self? Is this the self-sufficient? Is this the self-sufficient self? Is this the self-sufficient self? Is this the self-sufficient self? And coming up with none of the five that are the self-sufficient self, and then therefore you say, oh, it doesn't exist. Okay.
This one, this one. Da tong ba sigurda. Oh, did the rangetuba mandimaina? Ana dos yor besna. Oh. 풍부레 대신에 다 랑게트베 다 디똥바레 딘데 되어 말세요라 카가 딘데스 요 말세요라 다 말인데 디스와 다메바 다 똥바나 수지 풍부레 대신에 코 랑게트베 다 딘데스요라 오 제신지 똥바레 요 말에 딜레 타덴 딘데 요 말에 딜레 타덴 딘데 요 말에 딜레 요 말세요라
so then when we talk about the self as being something totally separate from the five aggregates, then you have to go also through each of the five aggregates and say it's not totally separate from the form aggregate, it's not totally separate from the feeling aggregate, it's not totally separate from the discrimination aggregate, it's not totally different from the compositional factors aggregate, it's not totally different from the consciousness aggregate.
Do so.
Do so.
Oh yeah,
maybe that's That's enough. The Tamachi Yoda, what the?
Lap chung
Concert the Dutsa Yoda.
Oh yeah.
Concert Dutsa the Dago.
Dan di re do. Ani sha shan tong de lam ne du re.
Jugma Jiggy
Oh
Yoda.
de lap gura. De chwa de chema lap gen sen.
Yeah, so anyway, there was one question left here, and we'll cover that in our next get together.